The great hall of the Galactic Council buzzed with angry voices. Representatives from 47 different species sat in their assigned seats, all of them talking at once. The air felt thick with tension as translators worked overtime to keep up with the heated discussion. Ambassador Elena Vasquez sat quietly in the human section. Her dark eyes watched the chaos unfold while her hands remained folded in her lap. She had heard these arguments before, many times. "The humans want to explore beyond the void barrier again," shouted Chancellor Vorth, his blue skin turning darker with anger. The hegemony leader slammed his four-fingered hand on his desk. "This is madness!" High Priest Zelek of the Zelani rose from his seat. His tall, thin form cast a long shadow across the chamber floor. "For 1,000 years, our ancestors have forbidden travel beyond the void barrier. The ancient warnings are clear. That region of space devoured entire civilizations. The humans do not listen to wisdom," added Trademaster Corvin from the Korthak Consortium. His insect-like features clicked with disapproval. "They bring chaos wherever they go, always pushing boundaries, always asking dangerous questions." Elena finally stood up. The hall slowly grew quiet as all eyes turned to her. She was smaller than most of the other representatives, but something about her presence commanded attention. "We have found ruins," she said simply. Her voice carried clearly through the chamber's translation systems. "Ancient cities on 17 different worlds. All of them show signs of some great threat from beyond the galaxy's edge." Chancellor Vorth laughed, but it was not a kind sound. "Ruins prove nothing human. Old civilizations died for many reasons. War, disease, natural disasters. This does not mean we should go looking for mythical monsters in the dark." "The evidence suggests otherwise," Elena replied calmly. "Our archaeologists have found warning messages, detailed records of something that comes from the void between galaxies, something that feeds on advanced civilizations." Professor Mentik of the Ventari Science Council leaned forward. The scholarly species had always been humanity's closest allies on the council. Even if such threats existed in the past, surely they are long gone by now. Why risk disturbing whatever lies beyond the barrier? Elena's expression remained unchanged. "Because we believe the threat still exists. Our calculations suggest a pattern. Every 50,000 years, these entities return to feed. According to our timeline, the next feeding is due soon." The hall erupted in angry voices again. Species after species stood to voice their objections. The Korthak Trade Consortium threatened to cut off all trade with human colonies. The Zelani priests declared humanity's theories to be blasphemous. Even the usually calm Aquatic Federation expressed concern about human warmongering. "Order. Order!" Chancellor Vorth called out, banging his ceremonial staff against the floor. When the noise died down, he looked directly at Elena. "Ambassador Vasquez, the Council has heard your people's theories before. We have always rejected them. The void barrier exists to protect us from the unknown dangers of deep space. We will not authorize any expedition beyond it. What if we go anyway?" Elena asked quietly. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Several representatives gasped. Others began muttering among themselves. Chancellor Vorth's eyes narrowed. "Then you would be violating Council law. Any species that breaks the Void Barrier Treaty faces immediate expulsion from the Council and complete economic isolation." Elena nodded slowly. "I understand." "Furthermore," added Trademaster Corvin, his mandibles clicking with satisfaction, "any human ships that attempt to cross the barrier will be stopped by Council enforcement fleets." "We understand your position," Elena said. She looked around the chamber one final time, meeting the eyes of representatives who had once called humans their friends. "Let us vote." The vote was swift and predictable. 46 species voted to maintain the void barrier restrictions. Only humanity voted to lift them. Elena stood and gathered her papers. "Humanity thanks the Council for their guidance," she said formally. "We respect your decision." She paused at the chamber door and turned back. "We have chosen a different path." Those were the last words any council member heard from an official human representative. Within hours, strange reports began filtering in from across the galaxy. Human colonies had gone silent. Not just a few outposts or research stations, but entire worlds. When concerned neighbors tried to make contact, they received only automated responses. The first investigation team reached the human colony of New Terra within 2 days. What they found made no sense. The cities were empty but undamaged. No signs of struggle or violence, no bodies. The colonists had simply vanished, leaving behind their homes, their possessions, even their pets. More teams arrived at other human worlds. The story was always the same. Empty cities with the lights still on, automated systems running perfectly, agricultural robots still tending crops, but no people anywhere. The only clue was a message that played on repeat from every human communication system. Humanity thanks the Council for their guidance. We have chosen a different path. Chancellor Vorth called an emergency session of the Council. "This is impossible," he declared. 12 billion humans cannot simply disappear overnight. "Perhaps they are hiding," suggested Professor Mentic. "Maybe they plan to stage some kind of dramatic return to prove their point about the dangers beyond the void barrier." Trademaster Corvin was less charitable. "This is clearly some kind of elaborate deception. The humans are trying to manipulate us with fear tactics." But as days turned into weeks, the truth became undeniable. Humanity had vanished from the galaxy. Every human ship, every human outpost, every human research station had gone dark. Long-range sensors detected no human activity anywhere within Council space. Some species celebrated. The hegemony praised the wisdom of their firm stance against human recklessness. The Zilani priest declared it a divine sign that the ancient warnings had been respected. The Korthak Consortium quickly moved to claim abandoned human trading posts and mining operations. Others felt less certain. The Ventari scientists requested permission to study the empty human worlds more carefully. They found evidence of massive preparation, hidden construction projects, stockpiled resources. Communication arrays pointed not toward other Council worlds but toward the deep void between galaxies. They were planning this for months, Professor Mentic reported to the Council. Maybe years. This was not a sudden decision. They knew we would reject their proposal and they prepared accordingly. But where did they go? Asked Chancellor Vorth. 12 billion people cannot hide forever. The answer came from deep space monitoring stations. Long-range sensors had detected massive energy signatures moving beyond the galaxy's edge, signatures that matched the predicted output of human-generation ships. Ships large enough to carry entire populations. The humans had not simply hidden from the Council. They had left the galaxy entirely. High Priest Zelak stood before the Council with a troubled expression. "Perhaps we were too hasty in our judgment," he admitted. "The humans seemed genuinely convinced of some great danger. What if they were right?" "Impossible," scoffed Chancellor Vorth. "They were fear-mongering, trying to drag the entire galaxy into some pointless conflict with imaginary enemies." But doubt had been planted. In the months that followed, some Council members began to wonder if humanity's departure had been wisdom rather than madness. The galaxy felt different somehow, quieter, more fragile. The humans had left as silently as shadows, taking with them their warnings, their knowledge, and their stubborn refusal to accept that some questions should not be asked. The Council would soon learn the price of their certainty. 5 years had passed since the humans disappeared from the galaxy. Chancellor Vorth stood on the observation deck of the Council's newest space station, watching cargo ships move in perfect formation between the trade routes. Everything was exactly as it should be. "The quarterly reports show record profits," Trademaster Corvin announced as he entered the deck. His insect features seemed more relaxed than they had been in decades. "Without human interference in the markets, trade has become wonderfully predictable." Chancellor Vorth smiled. The human departure had been the best thing to happen to galactic civilization in centuries. No more surprise exploration missions disrupting established shipping lanes. No more dangerous research projects that made other species nervous. No more uncomfortable questions about ancient warnings and mythical threats. The hegemony's expansion into former human territories is proceeding smoothly, Vorth reported. "We have established new colonies on 12 worlds that the humans abandoned. The infrastructure they left behind is quite useful." Professor Mentic approached them, carrying a datapad filled with scientific reports. The Ventari scientist looked tired but satisfied. "Our research programs are making steady progress as well. Without the humans constantly pushing for risky experiments, we can focus on safe, proven methods of advancement." The 3 leaders represented the new order in the galaxy: careful expansion, regulated trade, controlled scientific progress. Everything the Council had always believed civilization should be. Down in the main conference hall, representatives from dozens of species were celebrating the 5th anniversary of what they now called the Great Stabilization. The day humanity had chosen to remove itself from galactic affairs had become an unofficial holiday. To peaceful progress, declared High Priest Zalak, raising his ceremonial cup. The Zalani religious leader had gained considerable influence since the humans left. His philosophy of patient wisdom and respect for ancient warnings had proven popular. To profitable partnerships, added Trade Master Corvin, his mandibles clicking with satisfaction. The celebration continued late into the station's night cycle. Species that had once worried about human unpredictability now enjoyed the comfort of routine. Trade agreements that would have taken years to negotiate in the past now concluded in weeks. Cultural exchange programs proceeded without the disruptive element of human curiosity, but not everyone was celebrating. Captain Thex of the Council Defense Fleet sat alone in her quarters, studying reports from the Outer Rim territories. The military commander had always respected human tactical thinking, even when she disagreed with their methods. Something about their departure still bothered her. The reports on her desk told a story that the celebrating politicians preferred to ignore. Long-range sensors had been detecting unusual energy readings from beyond the void barrier for months. The readings were growing stronger and more frequent. They showed patterns that did not match any known natural phenomenon. Captain Thex had requested permission to investigate these readings several times. Each request had been denied by the Council's Safety Committee. "We will not repeat the humans' mistakes," they always said. The void barrier exists for good reason. Meanwhile, the edge colonies were reporting strange incidents. Nothing dramatic enough to cause alarm, but unusual enough to be noticed. Colonists on rim worlds were experiencing vivid dreams. Always the same basic imagery. Vast darkness moving between stars. Hungry shadows that consumed light itself. The Council's medical experts had studied these reports extensively. Their conclusion was reassuring: post-human stress syndrome. The sudden departure of humanity had left some beings feeling anxious about the future. The dreams were simply their subconscious minds processing this anxiety through symbolic imagery. Perfectly normal psychological response, declared Dr. Wavik, the Council's chief medical advisor. A few sessions of meditation therapy and these symptoms will disappear completely. Most RIM colonists accepted this explanation. The dreams were unpleasant, but they were just dreams. Life went on as normal. Trademaster Corvin was particularly pleased with how smoothly the transition had gone. The Korthak Consortium had taken over most human trading operations without any significant disruption to commerce. Human mining equipment was efficient and well-designed. Their agricultural techniques had proven useful for expanding food production. The humans may have been troublemakers, Corvin told his business partners, but they certainly knew how to build things that last. The former human colonies were thriving under new management. The hegemony had brought order and structure to worlds that had been chaotically managed under human control. The Zalani priests had established meditation centers where human research facilities once stood. The Aquatic Federation had transformed human underwater cities into beautiful artistic communities. Everyone agreed that the galaxy was better off without the constant worry of what the humans might do next. Professor Mentic presented his latest research findings to the Council's Science Committee. The Ventari had made significant advances in several fields that the humans had been investigating. Energy manipulation, faster-than-light communication, and advanced material science were all progressing at a steady, controlled pace. "We are learning everything we need to know," Mentic reported proudly, without the pressure to take dangerous shortcuts that the humans always favored. The committee approved funding for several new research projects. All of them were carefully designed to avoid any risk of destabilizing galactic civilization. No experiments with dangerous energy sources. No attempts to contact unknown intelligences. No expeditions beyond established safe zones. Chancellor Vorth felt deeply satisfied as he reviewed the committee's decisions. This was how proper civilization should work. Careful planning. Risk assessment. Gradual progress that did not threaten the stability that billions of beings depended on. The humans had never understood this basic truth. They had always been rushing toward the next horizon, the next discovery, the next dangerous adventure. Their departure had removed a constant source of chaos from galactic affairs. As the 5th anniversary celebration continued, speakers from many species praised the wisdom of the Council's decision to maintain the void barrier restrictions. The ancient warnings had been respected. The galaxy remained safe from whatever dangers might lurk in the dark spaces between galaxies. "We have built a golden age," declared Chancellor Vorth in his closing speech. "A time of peace, prosperity, and progress. A time when wisdom guides our decisions instead of reckless curiosity." The assembled representatives applauded enthusiastically. They had created exactly the kind of stable, peaceful civilization that every species claimed to want. But on the edge of the galaxy, the energy readings continued to grow stronger. And in the dreams of Rim colonists, the hungry darkness crept closer to the light. Captain Thex filed another request to investigate the anomalous readings. Like all the others, it was politely denied. The Council had chosen stability over curiosity, order over exploration, known safety over unknown dangers. They would soon learn that some choices cannot be unmade. The Golden Age was about to end, and the humans were no longer there to offer warnings that no one wanted to hear. The attack came without warning on a quiet Tuesday morning in the Karathi system. Commander Delac was reviewing routine patrol reports when his communications officer suddenly went rigid with shock. "Sir," the young Ventari stammered, "we're receiving an emergency signal from Karathi Prime. Multiple unknown contacts approaching the system." "Unknown contacts?" Delac frowned. The Karathi system was one of the most heavily populated in Council space. 12 billion beings lived on the various worlds and stations throughout the system. Nothing approached Karathi without proper clearance. "Put it on the main screen." The image that appeared made no sense. Massive shapes moved through space near the system's outer edge. They were enormous, each one the size of a small moon. But they moved with impossible grace. Their surfaces seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, making them difficult to see against the starfield. "Are those ships?" asked the communications officer. Delac studied the approaching objects. They had no recognizable design, no familiar technology signatures. They looked more like living creatures than constructed vessels, with smooth curves and organic-looking protrusions. "Try to establish communication. All frequencies open, sir. Broadcasting standard first contact protocols." The unknown ships did not respond. They simply continued their approach toward Karathi Prime. As they drew closer, the planet's defense systems activated automatically. Warning beacons lit up across the system as military stations went to full alert. "Sir, I'm getting massive energy readings from those ships," reported the sensor operator. "Unlike anything in our databases. The power levels are off the charts." Delac opened a channel to the Council Defense Fleet headquarters. "This is Commander Delac requesting immediate reinforcement for the Karathi system. We have unknown hostiles approaching populated worlds." Captain Thex's voice crackled through the communication system. "Delac, we're already scrambling every available ship. What can you tell me about these unknowns?" "Nothing good, Captain. They're not responding to any communication attempts, and they're heading straight for the most populated planet in the system." The defense fleet of Karathi Prime consisted of 200 ships. They formed a protective line between the unknown vessels and the planet. Admiral Korath, the system commander, tried one final attempt at communication. "Unknown vessels, you are approaching Council territory without authorization. Please respond immediately or we will consider your approach an act of aggression." Silence. The unknown ships continued forward. As they passed through the defensive line, something impossible happened. The Council ships simply ceased to exist, not destroyed by weapons fire, not torn apart by explosions. They were there one moment and gone the next, leaving only empty space where sophisticated warships had been seconds before. Admiral Korath watched in horror as his entire fleet vanished without firing a single shot. "All stations fall back immediately. Evacuate the planet. Repeat, begin immediate evacuation of all populated areas." But there was no time. The unknown ships reached Karathi Prime and began to feed. That was the only word that adequately described what happened next. The ships extended strange appendages that looked like feeding tubes. They touched the planet's surface and the world began to disappear. Not exploding or burning, but simply ceasing to exist. Mountains, oceans, cities, people, everything that made up the planet was consumed by some incomprehensible process. Within 6 hours, there was nothing left where Karathi Prime had been. No debris, no radiation, no evidence that billions of beings had lived and died there. Just empty space where a thriving world had existed that morning. The unknown ships moved on to the next planet in the system. Captain, Thex arrived with the Council's emergency response fleet just as the last world in the Karathi system disappeared. Her flagship and its escort vessels found themselves staring at a solar system that contained only a star and empty orbital paths where planets should have been. "Scan for survivors," Thex ordered, though she already knew what they would find. Nothing. "Captain," reported her science officer. "No life signs. No artificial structures. No wreckage. It's as if the entire system was never inhabited." The only evidence that 12 billion beings had lived in the Karathi system was the gravitational disturbances where their worlds had been. The unknown ships were nowhere to be seen. They had consumed an entire solar system and moved on, leaving behind only void. Thex immediately sent word to Council headquarters while her fleet spread out to search for any trace of the attackers. The response was swift and massive. Within days, the largest military force in galactic history had assembled under Thex's command. 5,000 ships representing every Council species converged on the suspected path of the unknown vessels. The fleet included the most advanced weapons technology available to galactic civilization. Energy cannons that could crack moons, missile systems that could track targets across entire star systems, defense shields that had never been penetrated by any known weapon. They found the enemy fleet approaching the Delvari system, home to 8 billion Aquatic Federation citizens. "All ships attack formation," Thex commanded. "Coordinate targeting on the largest vessels. Fire when ready." The battle began with a devastating barrage from the Council fleet. Thousands of energy weapons fired simultaneously at the unknown ships. Nuclear missiles streaked across space in massive volleys. The combined firepower could have destroyed a dozen fleets of conventional design. The enemy ships absorbed every shot without apparent damage. "What are those things made of?" demanded Admiral Korath, who had survived the Karathi disaster and joined Thex's command. "Unknown composition," replied the fleet's chief scientist. "They seem to be converting incoming energy into something else. Our weapons are actually making them stronger." The unknown ships began to respond, but their counterattack was unlike anything in the Council's military experience. Instead of firing back with energy weapons, they seemed to reach out with invisible force and simply edit Council ships out of existence. Entire squadrons vanished as if they had never been built. Worse, the enemy was learning. With each engagement, their response became more effective. They began to predict Council tactics and counter them before the Council ships could even execute their attack plans. "They're analyzing our battle patterns in real time," reported the tactical officer. "Every move we make, they adapt to counter it." The battle lasted 3 days. When it ended, less than 200 Council ships remained out of 5,000. The unknown fleet had lost nothing. They had consumed the Delvari system completely and were moving toward the next target. Captain Thex found herself in command of the largest military defeat in recorded galactic history. In her emergency report to the Council, she struggled to find words that could convey the scope of the disaster. "These entities are not just technologically superior," she wrote. "They appear to operate by completely different rules of physics. Our weapons cannot harm them. Our shields cannot protect us. They consume matter, energy, and something else that we cannot identify or understand." The reports from survivors were even more disturbing. The entities were not just destroying planets and ships. They seemed to be draining something fundamental from reality itself. Space near their ships felt wrong somehow, as if the basic laws of physics were being rewritten. Council scientists studying the sensor data from the battles made a terrible discovery. The unknown ships were not just consuming matter and energy. They were consuming information itself. The quantum patterns that defined how things existed in reality were being systematically devoured. Their unmaking creation at the most basic level. Professor Mentic reported to an emergency session of the Council. "Every system they attack is not just destroyed. It's removed from the universe as if it never existed." As more systems fell to the advancing enemy fleet, panic spread throughout Council space. Refugees fled in massive waves from rim territories toward the inner worlds. But there was nowhere to run that offered true safety. The entities moved faster than any ship and could apparently appear anywhere without warning. Chancellor Vorth called for calm, but his own voice shook as he addressed the emergency council session. "We must find a way to communicate with these beings. Perhaps they can be reasoned with." "They don't communicate," Captain Thex replied grimly. "They just consume. Everything in their path ceases to exist. This isn't a war, it's extinction. The Council faced a truth that none of them wanted to accept. Their greatest military forces had been swept aside like insects. Their most advanced technology was useless against the enemy. The stable, peaceful civilization they had built was being systematically devoured by something that operated beyond their understanding of reality. And the humans were not there to offer solutions that no one wanted to hear. Half the galaxy was gone. Chancellor Vorth stared at the holographic display in the emergency command center, watching red zones spread across the map like a disease. Each red area marked systems that no longer existed. Billions of lives simply erased from reality. The remaining Council species had retreated to their core worlds, abandoning the outer territories to the advancing entity fleet. What had once been a proud galactic civilization was now a desperate cluster of survivors huddled around their homeworlds, waiting for the end. Another 7 systems went dark overnight, reported Captain Thex. The military commander looked exhausted. She had been fighting a losing battle for months, watching her forces vanish one by one. At this rate, we have perhaps 6 weeks before they reach the inner core. Professor Mentik worked frantically at a bank of computers, analyzing every scrap of data they had gathered about their attackers. The Ventari scientist had not slept in days. I've run the patterns through every database we have. The entity movement follows a specific strategy. They're targeting the most developed systems first, working inward toward the oldest civilizations. Why? Asked High Priest Zalak. The Zalani religious leader had aged decades in the past few months as he watched his philosophy of patient wisdom prove useless against extinction. What do they gain by this approach? Maximum efficiency, Mentik replied grimly. Advanced civilizations contain more organized information, more complex patterns of matter and energy. They're feeding on civilization itself, and they want the richest sources first. Chancellor Vorth slammed his hand on the table. There has to be something we can do. Some weapon we haven't tried, some strategy we haven't considered. Sir, Captain Thex said quietly, we've lost contact with the last Outer Rim colonies. The entities have completely surrounded the core worlds. We're trapped. In the depths of the command center, a small team of Ventari researchers was working on a project that Chancellor Vorth had authorized despite his better judgment. They were analyzing the abandoned human databases, searching for any clue about how humanity had predicted this disaster. I've found something, announced Dr. Yevek, one of Mentik's assistants. Hidden files in the human archaeological databases. They're encrypted, but I think I can break the codes. The files that Dr. Yevek uncovered told a story that made the Council's blood run cold. Humanity had not just suspected that the entities existed, they had found detailed warnings left by previous galactic civilizations. The evidence was scattered across dozens of worlds that humans had explored against Council wishes. Ancient ruins containing the same warning in hundreds of different languages. The silence between stars returns when the galaxy grows too bright. According to the human research, the entities were not invaders from another galaxy. They were something far worse. They were gardeners. The pattern repeats every 50,000 years, Dr. Yevek explained to the assembled Council leaders. A galactic civilization reaches a certain level of complexity and technological advancement. That's when the entities emerge from whatever dimension they inhabit and begin their harvest. Harvest? Whispered Chancellor Vorth. They feed on organized information, Mentik said, his voice hollow. Complex civilizations are like fruit trees to them. They wait for us to ripen. Then they consume everything we've built and retreat back to the void between galaxies to digest what they've taken. The human files contained calculations that were depressingly accurate. Humanity had determined that the current galactic civilization had reached the threshold complexity level approximately 5 years ago. The next harvest was due to begin at any time. That's why they wanted to explore beyond the void barrier, realized High Priest Zalak. They weren't looking for conquest or adventure. They were trying to find these entities before the harvest began. Captain Thex found the most disturbing file of all. It was a tactical analysis of entity capabilities based on ruins from previous galactic civilizations. The humans had concluded that conventional warfare was completely useless against harvesters. They operated by different physical laws and could not be destroyed by any weapon that depended on manipulating matter and energy within normal space-time. The humans knew we couldn't fight them, Thex said bitterly. They knew that everything we'd built, Everything we'd achieved was doomed from the moment we reached sufficient complexity to attract the harvesters' attention. But they didn't tell us. Chancellor Vorth exploded. They could have warned us. Could have prepared us. Dr. Yevik pulled up another file. They did try to warn you, sir. Every human request to explore beyond the void barrier included references to potential threats from the galactic edge. Every archaeological expedition they proposed was designed to gather more evidence about the harvest cycle. The recordings were painful to watch. Years of human presentations to the Council, carefully explaining their theories about cyclical galactic extinctions. Ambassador Elena Vasquez standing before skeptical representatives, pleading for permission to investigate the ancient warnings. The Council dismissed everything they said as warmongering. Mentic said quietly, "Human paranoia, reckless curiosity, we refuse to listen." "So they chose a different path," added Captain Thex. The final human files revealed the scope of humanity's real response to the harvest threat. While the Council debated trade regulations and cultural exchange programs, humans had been secretly building the largest evacuation fleet in galactic history. Generation ships capable of carrying entire planetary populations. Resource processors that could sustain millions of people during journeys between galaxies. Navigation systems designed for travel through the void between star systems where no landmarks existed. They evacuated their entire species. Dr. Yevik reported. 12 billion humans loaded onto ships designed for permanent exile from the galaxy. They left everything behind rather than wait for the harvest to begin. Chancellor Vorth felt the weight of his decisions crushing down on him. We could have gone with them. If we had listened, if we had believed their warnings, we could have evacuated as well. Would you have voted for galactic evacuation based on ancient ruins and human theories? Asked High Priest Zelak. Be honest. Would any of us? The answer hung in the air unspoken. Even now, facing extinction, it was hard to accept that abandoning their entire civilization had been the rational choice. A communication alert interrupted their grim analysis. Captain Thex activated the incoming signal, expecting another report of lost colonies or advancing entity fleets. Instead, they heard a voice that none of them had expected to hear again. Council Command, this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Human Expeditionary Force. We have been monitoring your situation. Evacuation coordinates will follow this transmission. The holographic display lit up with new data streams. Star charts showing routes to uninhabited systems beyond the galaxy's edge. Technical specifications for survival ships. Instructions for preserving genetic and cultural databases during extended interstellar travel. The old galaxy is finished, Admiral Chen continued. The harvesters cannot be stopped once they begin feeding. But there are new stars waiting beyond the void, and we have prepared safe havens for any species willing to leave everything behind. Chancellor Vorth stared at the evacuation data with mixed emotions. Relief that humanity had offered salvation. Shame that they had ignored the warnings that could have prevented this disaster. And bitter acceptance that their proud galactic civilization was about to become nothing more than empty space. Why? He asked aloud, though the human transmission had ended. Why are they helping us after we refused to listen? The answer came in a second transmission, brief and matter-of-fact. Because extinction is extinction regardless of species. The universe is too vast and too dangerous for any of us to face it alone. In the end, the humans had done exactly what they always did. They had prepared for the worst possible outcome and offered to share their solutions with anyone who would listen. The Council finally understood that humanity's departure had not been abandonment or revenge. It had been an invitation that no one had been wise enough to accept. Now they faced the same choice humanity had made 5 years earlier. Die with their civilization, or follow the humans into the unknown dark between galaxies, carrying nothing but hope for a new beginning among distant stars. The end came faster than anyone expected. The entity swarm had paused at the edge of the core worlds for 3 days, as if savoring the moment before the final feast. Their dark ships floated in the void like hungry shadows blocking out the stars. The last remnants of galactic civilization waited in terror for the harvest to resume. Then the sensors detected something impossible. Captain, the communications officer called out, her voice shaking with disbelief. I'm reading human energy signatures approaching from the outer rim. Captain Thex rushed to the sensor station. That's impossible. The humans evacuated years ago, but the readings were unmistakable. Human ships, but not the sleek exploration vessels the Council remembered. These were massive, angular craft built for war. Ships designed by a species that had spent 5 years preparing for exactly this moment. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation. Hundreds of vessels, each one bristling with weapons that the Council had never seen before. They moved with deadly precision, taking up positions around the entity swarm. No communication requests, no attempts at negotiation. The humans simply began their attack. What followed was unlike any battle in galactic history. The human weapons didn't try to destroy the entities with conventional energy blasts or kinetic strikes. Instead, they fired strange projectiles that seemed to tear holes in space-time itself. Exotic radiation burst from the human ships in carefully coordinated patterns, creating fields of distorted reality around the enemy vessels. For the first time since the harvest began, the entities reacted to being attacked. Their ships twisted and writhed as if in pain when struck by human weapons. Dark fluid leaked from wounds that appeared to go deeper than mere physical damage. "They're hurting them," whispered Professor Mentic, staring at the tactical displays in amazement. "The humans have weapons that can actually harm the entities." The battle raged for hours. Human ships sacrificed themselves to create killing fields of radiation that forced the entities to retreat. Massive human dreadnoughts rammed directly into entity vessels, their hulls crackling with energy that seemed to unweave reality at the point of contact. But it was clear that the humans were not trying to win. They were buying time. Admiral Sarah Chen's voice finally crackled through the communication systems. Her tone was cold and professional. "Council Command, begin immediate evacuation of all populated worlds. You have approximately 6 hours before our containment fails." Chancellor Vorth opened a channel to the human fleet. "Admiral Chen, this is Chancellor Vorth. We thought you had abandoned us." "We're not here to save you," Chen replied bluntly. "We're here to ensure these entities don't follow us to our new homes." The word stung, but Vorth understood. Humanity had no obligation to help the species that had rejected their warnings and driven them from the galaxy. Their intervention was purely practical. The harvesters had to be contained until the evacuation was complete. "How do we evacuate entire worlds in 6 hours?" asked Captain Thex. A new transmission arrived from the human fleet. Technical specifications for emergency evacuation ships that could be constructed using automated systems. The humans had anticipated this scenario and prepared solutions in advance. "Your industrial fabricators can build these ships in 4 hours," Admiral Chen explained. "Load essential personnel and genetic samples only. Everything else must be left behind." The evacuation was a nightmare of desperate choices. Billions of beings crowded into hastily constructed ships that were never meant for long-term habitation. Entire cultures had to be compressed into data storage units. Millennia of art, literature, and scientific achievement were reduced to digital archives. Chancellor Vorth stood on the observation deck of the last hegemony evacuation ship, watching his homeworld fall behind. The planet where his species had evolved, where they had built their first cities and reached for the stars, was now just another target for the harvesters. "Sir," his aide reported, "the human fleet is requesting final confirmation that all evacuation ships are ready for departure." Vorth looked around at the crowded refugee vessel. Representatives from dozens of species, all of them carrying nothing but the hope that humanity's exile fleet had prepared safe harbors in the void between galaxies. "Confirmed," he said quietly. The human fleet began its final phase. Instead of continuing to fight the entities, they activated some kind of massive energy field that enclosed the entire core world's region. The harvesters were trapped inside, cut off from the rest of the galaxy by a barrier of twisted space-time. "That field won't hold them forever," Admiral Chen warned. "Maybe a few years if we're lucky. Long enough for you to reach the safe zones we've prepared." The evacuation fleet formed up behind human escort vessels and began the long journey to the galactic edge. As they traveled, Chen provided coordinates to 3 different star systems beyond the rim where humanity had established refugee colonies. "Basic infrastructure is already in place," she explained. "Atmospheric processors, food production facilities, and shelter for approximately 50 million beings per system. You'll have to expand from there." High Priest Zelak found himself sharing quarters with a group of Aquatic Federation engineers and Korthak traders. The old divisions between species seemed meaningless now that they were all refugees fleeing the same extinction. "Will humanity accept us as equals in these new colonies?" asked Trademaster Corvin. Or will we be refugees dependent on human charity forever? Admiral Chen's response was broadcast to all the evacuation ships. The colonies belong to whoever builds them. We've provided the foundation, but what you create from there is up to you. Humanity has its own new worlds to develop. Professor Mentic worked frantically to preserve what scientific knowledge could be saved during the journey. The great libraries of galactic civilization had been reduced to compressed data files, but at least the information would survive. The humans have shared their research on the harvest cycle, he reported to the other refugees. If we can avoid reaching the threshold complexity level that attracts the entities, we might be able to build new civilizations that can survive. How do we do that? Asked Chancellor Vorth. Careful expansion, distributed populations, multiple small colonies instead of massive galactic empires. The harvesters seem to be attracted to concentrated civilization, not scattered settlements. The journey to the new colonies took months. During that time, the various species learned to work together in ways that had never been necessary when they had separate worlds to retreat to. Joint councils formed to coordinate resource distribution. Mixed crews operated the evacuation ships. Children of different species played together in the cramped refugee quarters. When they finally arrived at the first safe system, they found exactly what Admiral Chen had promised: a planet with breathable atmosphere, basic industrial facilities, and enough infrastructure to support the immediate needs of millions of refugees. But there was something else waiting for them. A monument built from the same dark metal as human ship hulls. Carved into its surface was a simple message: to those who came after, learn from our mistakes. The universe is vast enough for all of us to find our own paths among the stars. Build wisely, expand carefully, and remember that survival is a choice that must be made again and again. The monument was signed not with human names, but with a simple phrase: the species that chose tomorrow. Chancellor Vorth stood before the monument with representatives from all the surviving council species. Behind them, the work of building new colonies was already beginning. Ships were being unloaded. Temporary shelters were being erected. The slow process of rebuilding civilization was starting once again. They could have left us to die, said High Priest Zelak. They would have been justified in doing so. Humanity doesn't think that way, replied Captain Thex. They prepare for the worst and hope for the best. Even when we rejected their warnings, they planned for our survival. In the distance, human escort ships were already departing for their own colony systems. Admiral Chen's final transmission was brief. Good luck. The galaxy you left behind is finished, but there are infinite galaxies waiting to be explored. Choose your path wisely. The council species watched the human ships disappear into the void between stars. They were alone now with the consequences of their choices and the opportunity to build something better. Years later, as the refugee colonies grew into thriving settlements, long-range sensors detected the final act of the harvest. The barrier around the core worlds had failed, and the entities had finished consuming what remained of galactic civilization. The ancient stars that had witnessed the rise of dozens of species now shone on empty space. But in the void between galaxies, new lights were beginning to shine. Scattered colonies growing slowly and carefully, guided by the hard-won wisdom of species that had learned the price of ignoring warnings they didn't want to hear. The humans had departed silent as shadows, leaving the council to confront the ruin of their choices. But they had also left something else: the chance to begin again, to build better, and to remember that in a universe full of darkness, sometimes the greatest courage is knowing when to step into the unknown, rather than cling to the familiar light that is already fading. The old galaxy was dead, but among distant stars the future was still being written.